I paid $15,000 for my parents' dream vacation. They took my brother instead and said he deserved it more. Now they're begging me for a place to sleep. Hello everyone. I am Alex, 32 years old. I live in Decatur, Georgia with my wife Callista and our 2 girls. Sophie and Emery spend their afternoons after school running about our 2-story house, which is a tiny garden. Both Callista and I work as software developers. Callista works for a finance company and I create mobile apps for a technology startup. Our combined salary is sufficient to allow us to live comfortably without having to worry about our daily expenses. Our current existence is really tranquil. Every morning we get up and prepare a basic breakfast before driving 5-year-old Sophie and 7-year-old Emery to school together. Sophie is in kindergarten and Emery is already in 2nd grade. Our family weekends are typically spent doing significant yet uncomplicated activities. We sometimes organize small picnics in surrounding parks or go for walks along the trail around Stone Mountain Lake. We occasionally stay at home and cook together. Callista teaches the kids how to make chocolate chip cookies as I cook dinner. Weekend evenings are reserved for family movie nights, which typically include animated flicks that all 4 of us like. Previously, we would take the kids to Atlanta to see their paternal grandparents every Sunday. But a year ago, after my parents abandoned my family on a trip I paid for, Callista and I decided to break off all communication with them completely. Family. My story begins on my father's 60th birthday. This was a significant milestone, so Dad arranged a big party. All of the relatives and friends were present to enjoy that day. My family delivered a special gift for Dad's birthday that day, the most recent iPad. After noticing that Dad frequently had to squint while reading news on his phone, I decided that an iPad with a larger screen would allow him to read the news more comfortably without hurting his eyes. Sophie and Emery both handed Grandpa gifts that day. The 2 tiny ones had spent the entire week sketching colorful pictures for Grandpa with houses, trees, and families. Aside from that, the kids assisted Callista in baking a chocolate birthday cake with vanilla frosting, which my father had always enjoyed. My brother Ryan's family also attended the party, however, they arrived empty-handed, carrying only flowery words and cheerful grins. Ryan is 2 years younger than I am. His family also resides in Atlanta, only a few miles from our parents' home. Ryan has been my parents' favorite kid since he was very young. Even as adults, my parents favor Ryan in numerous circumstances. They always find reasons to justify Ryan's conduct, even if they are not fully suitable. However, I did not give any thought to this preference. My own life was already complete and happy, so I didn't see the need to compete or compare myself to my younger brother. After the party, when the last guests had left and the loud laughter had subsided, we sat down in the pleasant living room. Sophie and Emery were fatigued from a long day of running around with their relatives, so they fell asleep on the sofa. Ryan's 2 children were still seated on the floor carpet, squabbling and fighting over toys. In the comfortable environment following the celebration, my father suddenly expressed, in a dreamy tone, a dream he had been nursing for a long time. With distant eyes, he spoke of Montage Palmetto Bluff, a luxury resort in South Carolina that he had seen numerous times in travel reviews. Issues. After Dad's sharing, my mother sighed and added, "Sadly, by the time we leave this world, you and I may still not be able to go because the cost is too high." Hearing Mom's remarks, the entire living room fell silent. Ryan and his wife exchanged eyes, and Callista grinned at me. We merely nodded and listened, then chuckled quietly, like if it were a distant dream that everyone experiences. After a few minutes, the entire family discussed work, the weather, and their plans for the upcoming week. However, Dad's desire to go to Montage Palmetto Bluff continued to dominate my thoughts. That evening, when Sophie and Emery had fallen asleep in their room, Callista and I sat down on our familiar sofa in the living room. The soft yellow light from the table lamp produced a comfortable mood. But in that calm time, Callista came up with an unexpected suggestion. My wife remarked in a kind but resolute tone, "Do you think we should sponsor that trip for your parents? They would go with our family." When I heard Callista's unexpected idea, I looked up at her in amazement. "When did you start thinking about this?" I inquired with curiosity. Instead of responding right once, Callista rose up and grabbed her laptop off the desk. She opened it and showed me the thorough Excel spreadsheet she had created. Callista had carefully estimated the costs over $15,000 for 6 individuals to spend 3 days at Montage Palmetto Bluff Life. Every expense was noted on the spreadsheet, including luxurious rooms with river views, dinners at fancy restaurants, wilderness kayaking activities, calming spa services, and even children's entertainment activities. Callista had even estimated the gas expenditures for the trip from Atlanta to South Carolina. I was stunned by the figures on the laptop screen. Even though our total income wasn't particularly poor, I'd never considered spending $15,000 on a 3-day trip. This was a significant amount of money for our family. Finally, it was the equivalent of 4 to 5 months' savings or a year's tuition for Sophie and Emery. Callista noticed the hesitancy in my eyes and gently placed her hand on my shoulder to encourage. "I know this is a lot of money, but it's your parents' dream. They've worked hard and are now 60 years old." I remained silent, reflecting on what Callista had just spoken. Childhood memories flooded back into my thoughts. Images of my father working from sunrise to night and my mother continuously concerned about household finances. Experiences. After a few minutes of deliberation, weighing logic against passion, I finally nodded in accord and told Callista, "All right, let's surprise them." Callista grinned brightly in response. At the time, we both believed we had done the right thing. The next day, after ending my shift at work, I drove straight to my parents' house in Atlanta rather than returning home as normal. My pulse was racing with anticipation as I planned a great surprise for them. I envisioned the brilliant smiles on their faces when they heard the news. When I entered the familiar house, I noticed my parents seated in the living room, watching the evening news. With a confident smile, I told them the good news. "I have wonderful news for you both. Our family has decided to sponsor the trip to Montage Palmetto Bluff that Dad mentioned yesterday." Initially, their reaction was exactly what I had expected. My mother's mouth dropped open in amazement, and Dad stood up, eyes wide with incredulity. My mother shouted cheerfully, Really, Alex? You're not joking with me, are you?" But as soon as I explained that we would be going as a big family, Callista, our 2 girls, and my parents, their expressions froze. The delighted expression from seconds before had turned uncertain. After a little delay, my mother inquired carefully, "What about Ryan's family? Your brother?" Hearing those words, my heart felt pinched. I had psychologically prepared for the situation. Trying to maintain a steady tone, I replied, "You can call and ask him if his family wants to join us. We'll help book their spots, but he needs to transfer the money first for us to pay." As soon as I finished speaking, my mother quickly offered, in a voice that sounded imploring, "Why don't you pay for Ryan's family too? He's your brother." Hearing Mom's idea, I stated directly, "This trip costs a lot of money. I can't afford to pay for both families." After my statements, my mother grew silent and stared down at the floor. After a few seconds in the oppressive environment, I felt as if I was standing at a crossroads with endless possibilities. Finally, I spoke up in a decisive tone. "If you don't want to go with our family, I'll cancel this trip." Immediately, my father shouted up in a worried voice, "Don't get upset, Alex. Your mother didn't mean anything by it. We'll go. We'll go." After my father's statements and noticing the tension in the air, I decided to leave immediately. Throughout the journey home, my thoughts began to wander. I wasn't sure if I'd made a mistake by sponsoring this trip. How would you manage it if your parents offered to fund your brother's family, as mine did? Please share your ideas in the comments below. That evening when I got home, I sat with Callista on our usual sofa and repeated my entire chat with my parents. Callista shook her head, angry, as she heard my mother beg me to pay for Ryan's family. Despite her anger at my parents' attitude, Callista kindly told me you should stay calm, maybe they want the whole family to have fun together. After a few more minutes of discussion, we decided to remain with our initial plan of sponsoring the vacation for my parents and our family, regardless of what had happened. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work and checking my emails, the phone rang unexpectedly. Saad Lee. Looking at the screen and seeing Mom, I responded in a little annoyed tone from yesterday's talk. When I picked up, my mother sounded more upbeat and eager than normal. She said to me, "I have good news. I have a friend who works at Montage Palmetto Bluff. I can make the reservations for you." When I heard the suggestion, I paused and inquired, "Why don't you let me book it myself as originally planned?" Mom noticed the hesitancy in my words and explained with a compassionate tone, With this connection, I guarantee we'll get the best rooms with the most beautiful views for the whole family. Besides, I know you and Callista are busy with 2 little ones to handle and stressful work. I want to help you handle these booking procedures so you don't have to worry about it." Hearing my mother's rational explanation warmed my heart since she was thoughtful. At that point, I had no reason to be skeptical. Having a friend in the travel industry was quite common, and having assistance booking accommodations would be useful. School? So I transferred the $15,000 and filled out personal information for my family members, Callista, Sophie, and Emery, so Mom could reserve the accommodation. Mom called back that afternoon to announce the results of the money transfer. She told me she was satisfied. "Everything is done. We'll depart on Thursday in 3 weeks." We opted to drive to Montage Palmetto Bluff in South Carolina, which was only approximately a 3-hour drive from Atlanta. This was also more convenient for the kids, as we could carry a lot of personal belongings without worrying about airline luggage. During the 3 weeks of preparation, the mood in our home became more vibrant than ever. Sophie and Emery talked about the vacation every evening with tremendous excitement. Every night, Sophie would rush to me and ask, "Daddy, what kind of fish are there? Can I go kayaking?" Meanwhile, Emery concentrated on preparing bags. She would regularly bring her favorite toys from her room and place them in a little pile next to the luggage. When Sophie observed Callista preparing things, she would respond, "Mommy, I need to bring this doll to play with Grandma and Grandpa." Callista constantly told the kids about the wonderful activities we planned to do together. She mentioned kayaking expeditions into the wilderness, great dinners at posh restaurants, and most importantly, the quality time the children would spend with their paternal grandparents. Every day I saw the excitement and joy in Sophie and Emery's eyes, and my heart swelled with happiness. I knew the decision to spend $15,000 on this vacation was correct. Seeing the kids happy made me feel like every sacrifice was worthwhile. I started looking forward to this trip. After months of rigorous work, this would be an excellent moment for the family to unwind and reconnect. However, I had no clue at the time that in just a few more days, my family would take me on a journey I would remember for the rest of my life. Not for the wonderful memories, but for the worst anguish and betrayal I had ever encountered. 3 weeks later, on Thursday morning about 10 a.m., we arrived at my parents' house in Atlanta, full of excitement. Sophie and Emery sat in the back seat, continuously talking about the amazing things they would do. However, as we reached in front of my parents' house, the scene before my eyes perplexed me. The gate was carefully closed, and their beloved Toyota Camry remained in the garage. I honked the horn many times before exiting the car and ringing the doorbell. There was no answer from within the quiet house. At that point, I took out my phone and dialed my parents' number, but the phone continued to ring without being answered. I called 3 times in a row and still received no response. When Callista noticed my confusion, she looked out the window and worriedly inquired, "Where did they go?" I shook my head and responded, "They're probably out buying more stuff for the long journey. They might have forgotten to bring their phone or put it on silent mode." We chose to wait in the car. Minute by minute, the restlessness in my heart increased. After several calls, my mother eventually answered the phone around 11 a.m. With anxiety, I said, "Where are you?" We've already arrived at the house. After my question, my mother responded briefly, I'm out with Ryan. Hearing this unexpected response left me perplexed. I tried to calm my voice and said again, Why are you out with Ryan? What about our trip? Instead of responding, my mother abruptly hung up. At that point, my heart appeared to cease pounding and a sense of unease rose in my chest. About 30 seconds later, while I was still processing what my mother had said, my phone suddenly buzzed, indicating a new message. My mother had texted me saying, Your brother's family will be taking your family's place. They're more entertaining. After reading these lines, my palms twitched uncontrollably. I read and reread the message several times, unable to believe it was true. They had abandoned us. The folks who had paid the whole $15,000 for the trip they were now enjoying. I turned and handed my phone to Callista to show her the message, feeling as if I wanted someone to see it to ensure I wasn't dreaming. Callista covered her mouth with her hand, terrified, and mumbled, They can't do this. Her eyes were filled with sympathy, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. In my wrath, the first thought that came to mind was to drive straight to Montage Palmetto, bluff and confront them, demanding justice. I wanted to confront them directly and ask why they could persecute us. But just as I was going to start the car, Callista hastily placed her hand on mine and said, Don't do that. The money has already been transferred to them, and your parents, not us, made the reservation. Hearing my wife's suggestion, I knew we had no legal right to take this trip. At that point, my body went rigid while my mind struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. The world around me seemed to come to a halt in that instant, leaving only the sound of my heavy breathing and Callista's concerned expression. After about 5 minutes of cooling down, I returned my attention to Sophie and Emery in the back seat. The two tiny ones were still excitedly waiting, continuously asking when we were leaving. Sophie grabbed her favorite doll closely, and Emery had a nature picture book to read on the drive. When I saw my children's innocent eyes, my heart felt constricted. I couldn't allow my parents' betrayal to ruin the 3-week vacation the kids had been looking forward to. I attempted to remain calm and consider other choices while suppressing my growing rage. We sought a destination to go today that would make the kids happy while also providing my family with a memorable vacation. Callista and I took out our phones and quickly looked up resorts around Atlanta. Time was not on our side. It was nearly lunch time, and most nice resorts were completely booked for the weekend. I began to worry after contacting the first 3 resorts and receiving fully booked responses. Fortunately, when I called Barnsley Resort in Adairsville, Georgia, the hotel receptionist told me they still had a 4-person family suite. Without hesitation, I quickly made a reservation and paid in advance over the phone. The accommodation was not cheap, but in this case, all I wanted was for the kids to have a good time on vacation. After finishing the booking formalities, I returned to the car's back seat and told my 2 kids in the gentlest manner imaginable, Grandma and Grandpa have an emergency, so they won't be joining us. But we'll still have a wonderful trip. Emery looked a little upset after my news and questioned, Why aren't Grandma and Grandpa coming with us, Daddy? I smiled at Emery's slightly sad expression and responded, Sometimes adults have important things to take care of, but that means we'll have more time to have fun together. After that, my family drove away from Atlanta to Barnsley Resort in Adairsville, GA. On the way, I tried to concentrate on driving and chatting with the kids, but my heart still remembered my parents' horrible treachery. Due to traffic congestion on the highway, our family arrived at Barnsley Resort about 3 p.m. After checking in and dropping off our bags, we decided to do some light activities to help the kids rest after over 4 hours in the van. Sophie and Emery were very enthused about duck feeding at the resort's tiny lake. The 2 tiny ones laughed as the ducklings competed for the bread pieces they tossed into the water. Following that, we played a quick round of mini golf, during which Emery demonstrated her amazing accuracy. While the 2 youngsters were joyfully playing on the playground, I took out my phone to capture these happy moments for Instagram. I wanted to preserve these wonderful family memories. even though the circumstances were unexpected. As I was just opening Instagram to share the images, I noticed a post from my mother's account. The vision that flashed was of my mother smiling brightly next to Ryan, his wife, and their children, with the opulent lobby of Montage Palmetto Bluff in the background. The caption that accompanied it made me freeze. "Happy with my son and grandchildren. Thank you, Ryan, for financing this trip." What made me extra angrier were the comments underneath the post, where a series of friends and relatives came to congratulate Ryan, saying things like, "Ryan is so great, lucky to have Ryan taking care of his parents. I wish I had a son like Ryan." My blood was boiling. They didn't just dump us. They openly gave Ryan credit in front of all of his friends and relatives, allowing him to be celebrated with my money. On the first evening, after Sophie and Emery had fallen asleep in their room, I sat with Callista on the balcony, staring out at the resort's calm garden. With a firm voice, I told my wife, "I've devised a strategy to teach my parents a lesson. They must understand that mistreating us will result in consequences." Following that statement, I began to explain my idea to Callista. Callista shook her head in response to the plan. She warned me, "You should calm down. This could tear your family apart." But at that point, the determination in my heart had hardened into steel. I looked directly into Callista's eyes and stated, "No. This time I will demand justice." Callista was silent for a moment before nodding in accord with my idea. That night, I decided the plan would be carried out once we returned from our trip. I didn't want negative feelings to ruin my wonderful time with my children. Callista and I spent the next 2 days on the vacation, sharing memorable moments with our 2 young princesses. We hiked forest paths together, made cookies in the lodge kitchen, and spent relaxing afternoons by the lake. Although the sadness remained in my heart, Sophie and Emery's innocent laughter helped to ease my soul. After returning from Barnsley Resort, I went to the law office of Miller & Associates, a respectable firm I had found online. The office was housed in a high-rise structure in downtown Atlanta with a professional and formal ambience. When I met with Lawyer Blake, I explained my case in full. He listened with a serious gaze and occasionally nodded in agreement. After I finished describing the full tale, Lawyer Blake sincerely told me, "You have the right to take back what belongs to you, and I will guide you through the proper legal procedures." Following that, he went on to describe the procedures I needed to follow in order to operate legally and effectively. I took careful notes on each step and document I needed to prepare. I felt abnormally calm when sitting at my workstation at home with the official notice that evening. The serious legal writing on the documents represented the power of justice. I was confident that they would learn the lesson they deserved, and I was also confident that I would not regret my decision. The next day, after concluding my work shift at the office, I chose to take an Uber to my parents' house rather than driving home. I purposely did not drive my automobile. On the drive there, I grasped the white envelope hard, which contained the legal notification that Lawyer Blake had assisted me in drafting. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhilaration combined with the sadness that stayed in my heart. When the automobile came to a stop in front of the familiar house, I noticed the light in the living room was turned on, signaling that my parents were home. I stepped out of the car, paid the driver, and approached to ring the doorbell. After a few rings, my mother came to open the door. When my mother saw me arrive at the door, she exclaimed, surprised, "Alex, why did you come here?" What struck me the most was that there was no hint of regret or shame on her face. She acted normally, as if nothing had happened and that abandoning my family on the trip was a little misunderstanding. Standing. Right after that, I entered the residence without waiting for an invitation. My father was seated on the sofa, watching television, and gazed up at me with an unreadable face. Without saying anything, I took the notification out of the envelope and handed it to them. I calmly and coldly informed them, "This is a legal notice." My parents took the paper and read it together. I could watch the emotions on their faces morph from uncertainty to panic as they realized the significance of the legal text. After I finished reading, my mother cried, shivering, "You can't do this. We're your father and mother. I responded with a sarcastic tone. According to the notice, you have 30 days to leave this house. I've let you live here for free for many years now. I need to take it back. I'm asking you to leave as stated in the notice. After my frigid comments, my mother burst into tears. She wailed, pleading, "You can't be heartless enough to kick your parents out. Where would we live? We're old now. We don't have the strength to find a place." At that moment, I witnessed my mother's tears and my heart felt constricted. But then I remembered the photograph on social media and the sense of betrayal when I read my mother's letter. I stopped for a few seconds, then took out my phone, accessed the app, and found the photo my mother had posted for days before. I placed the phone screen up to my mom's face and asked, "Didn't Ryan sponsor the trippy up? You can go live with him." After seeing the photo, my mother became silent and couldn't say anything. She realized her deception had been exposed. Not stopping there, I went to the location where the keys to the Camry were stored, the silver automobile I had purchased and allowed them to use for years. I took up the key ring and told them I'm taking back the car starting today. Hearing this statement, my father yelled out in terror, "Just because of a trip you're treating us like this." My mother followed up with an angry voice, "We're family, you're so selfish." Hearing their claims, my wrath rose up. I said firmly, "No family takes money from their older son to sponsor the younger one's trip." I turned around and left the home with the Camry without saying anything else since I didn't want to dispute anymore. To better grasp the scenario, I need to tell you about the house they were living in. I own the entire house. I purchased it 3 years ago with funds from Callista and my software engineering gigs. When I saw my parents having to rent a little apartment at a rather high price, I felt awful for them. I didn't want to see my elderly parents living in a rental home and struggling financially. I decided to let them stay in this house, absolutely free of charge. For the past 3 years, I have not taken a single dime from them. This is a 2016 Toyota Camry that I drove before having my family. After purchasing a 7-seat SUV in 2022 to meet the needs of picking up and dropping off my children, I allowed them to use the Camry for daily transportation. But now, when they no longer recognized me as their son and could betray me without hesitation, I take back what was mine. Ryan contacted me that evening, just as I had arrived home. As soon as I answered the phone, Ryan's rage-filled voice burst out. "What are you doing? Why are you kicking Mom and Dad out of the house? You're so cruel." Hearing his charges, I felt a rush of rage rise in my heart. I held the phone so hard that my knuckles became white. Ryan shouted without waiting for my response, "Mom has been crying for hours. They said you're demanding they leave the house in 30 days. You can't do that." Hearing that, I became annoyed. I said with a decisive tone, "If Mom and Dad and you pay back the $15,000 for the trip and agree to pay rent for the house at $1,500 per month, the current market rate, then I'll reconsider." Ryan was completely silent when he heard the figure of $15,000. I could sense his perplexity. After a long silence, Ryan quickly responded fiercely, "Mom and Dad invited me to go. I didn't know about that." Ryan hung up after this sentence, leaving behind a long beep in my ear. That evening, I also started receiving calls from relatives and acquaintances of my parents. Uncle Frank was the first caller. Uncle angrily said, "Alex, how could you treat your parents like that? They raised you." Aunt Diane was next. Unlike Uncle Frank, Aunt Diane did not condemn, but instead questioned with a sympathetic voice. "Alex, I heard you have problems with your parents. What happened?" I told Aunt Diane the entire tale. From donating $15,000 for the trip to my parents abandoning my family to accompany Ryan, Aunt Diane offered a helpful response after hearing, "I support you. You did the right thing. No one has the right to treat you like that, not even your parents." Hearing my aunt's encouraging remarks gave me some comfort. The following 2 days were filled with calls from my parents' relatives and acquaintances. From morning to night, my phone rang with complaints, suggestions, and even threats. Each such call made me feel as if I were being accused. I grew tired of continually explaining and defending my conduct. Looked, I was so bored of this scenario, so I called Aunt Diane and asked her to hold a family gathering. I wanted to be able to tell the truth in front of everyone rather than explaining it individually over the phone. The meeting took place at Aunt Diane's house on Sunday evening. The majority of family members were present, including uncles, aunts, and cousins. My parents were also invited, but they declined to attend. Standing in front of everyone, I explained why I had decided to evict my parents from the house and take back the automobile. I told them about my mother's betrayal message, the $15,000 sponsorship for the trip, and the social media post that credited Ryan. After hearing the narrative, most families were taken aback and began to understand my motives. Many folks voiced their support. However, other people believed that families should help one another and be willing to make sacrifices for affection. Among them was Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother. Uncle Frank shook his head and replied, "They're still your parents. Family members have to help each other and know how to sacrifice. You can't abandon them like that." Hearing these remarks, I felt a flash of rage rise. I gazed directly into Uncle Frank's eyes and said, "My dad is your blood brother. He's also your family. You and he share the same DNA. Why don't you take him in?" After my offer, Uncle Frank instantly opposed. "I still have my own family, my wife and kids." I grinned coldly and responded, "You just said family has to help each other." Uncle Frank jumped up violently and departed without saying anything further. At that point, I recognized that many individuals only know how to counsel others to sacrifice when they are not experiencing losses themselves. My parents refused to leave despite the fact that I had given them 30 days' notice. Perhaps they assumed that by refusing to leave the house, I would be powerless to harm them. They may have anticipated that time would cause me to calm down and reconsider my decision, but they miscalculated it. My determination stayed as strong as steel. When the 30-day limit passed, I filed an eviction action in district court. Lawyer Blake guided me through the difficult legal procedures. 3 days after I filed the complaint, an official summons was delivered to my parents' residence. They had to appear in court on the designated day to explain why they didn't comply with the notice to leave the house. That evening, I received an SMS from my father with the following content: "Do you dare to take us to court? We are not going anywhere." There. Reading Dad's text, I got the impression that they still didn't comprehend how serious the situation was. They might believe this was all a game, a means for me to intimidate them. However, the law is not a game. A week later, on the trial day, I stood in court with all of the papers establishing my ownership of the house and evidence that my parents had been informed to leave. Callista also joined me as a witness. However, my parents neglected to attend court. The defendants' seats remained vacant throughout the hearing. The judge, a middle-aged lady with a serious expression, studied the records and declared, based on the facts presented and the defendants' refusal to attend to defend themselves, the court decides to rule in favor of the plaintiff. After hearing the judge's judgment, I felt both relieved and sad. Although I won the lawsuit, it was not the win I desired. After receiving the court's writ of possession, a formal instrument that allowed me to retake the title of the residence, I turned it over to the county police for enforcement. 2 days later, I received a call from the police, alerting me that they would begin enforcement the following morning. I chose not to attend the scene since I did not want to see the terrible moment. According to the police report, my parents were forcibly removed from the house in front of law enforcement officers. They were allowed to take their personal stuff and were given enough time to arrange them. The most startling thing I learned from Aunt Diane after my parents were evicted was that Ryan had refused to let them stay with him. When my parents asked for help, Ryan argued that his house was too small and couldn't accommodate 2 additional people. Aunt Diane exclaimed angrily, "Your parents only asked to stay for a week to find a rental place." Ryan, however, continued to disagree. He stated that his wife was not comfortable with having outsiders in the house. After that, my parents grew enraged and severed relations with Ryan. They learned that the child they had always preferred, the person they had picked to replace my family on the trip, was eventually unwilling to assist them when necessary. At that point, I realized I had lost something valuable that could not be restored. But at the same time, I realized that the truth about human nature had been fully revealed. A year has gone since my parents were forcibly ejected from the house, and while there have been big changes, I can say that I have found serenity in my life again. My family is happy now. Sophie and Emery are used to not having stressful visits to their grandparents' residence. Instead, we use our weekends for more important family activities. Callista and I believe our marriage has strengthened since we no longer have to deal with pressures from extended family. My parents, according to Aunt Diane, are currently sleeping in my aunt's garage on a temporary basis. Aunt Diane has generously remodeled that space and provided them with a bed and other necessities. Although the conditions are not perfect, at least they have shelter. My parents visited our place about a week ago. They appeared Sunday afternoon when I was playing with the kids in the garden. Their look had changed dramatically from a year before. They were older, more haggard, and appeared to have been through some unpleasant months. My mother stepped forward with begging eyes when she spotted me and said, "Alex, we came here hoping you'd let bygones be bygones and give us a chance." At that point, I stood motionless, not responding instantly. My heart was still filled with terrible emotions from the trip a year earlier. Finally, I shook my head and replied, "I can't." My mother's dismay was palpable when she heard this answer. She spoke tremblingly. "I miss the son you used to be." Following my mother's comments, I grinned coldly and responded, "That is gone." The comment ripped through the air like a knife, leaving my parents speechless. I noticed tears rise up in my mother's eyes, while Dad dropped his head, refusing to look at me. My heart sank when I noticed their haggard appearance, considerably grayer hair, gaunt cheeks, and ancient clothes. Despite the anguish I'd been through, they were still the parents who gave birth to and reared me. Now I'm faced with a difficult decision. Part of me is still furious and saddened over what occurred. However, another part of me feels sorrow for them and their current situation. So, what do you think? Should I give them a chance? Please share your opinions in the comments area below this story. If this tale moves you, remember to subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it. Thank you for following this story. Goodbye, and we'll see you again. You've listened to my story. I hope she shocked you just like she shocked me. Subscribe to me because it will be the best support for me in this very difficult time. You've been on the Shocking Reddit Confessions channel.